What's going on, kids? Today we're going to use our Hunter TC3700 tire machine to dismount these old Bridgestones and put on a fresh set of Falcon 660s. So one of the first things that we're going to want to do with our new set of tires is make sure they're the same size as the ones that are coming off of these wheels. Just a good thing to double check to make sure that it's actually going to go on. And we can see that this size is a 245/40/17, which is exactly the same as these, even though when we look at this, the Bridgestones are significantly thinner. Now, that's the stack up of all four, but just that little bit of difference should still clear on the car and it should be okay. Before we throw this tire on the machine, I'm going to have to let all the air out of it so we can actually take the tire off of the wheel. We've got this tool here that's a valve core removal tool, and we just put this down in the valve core, unscrew it, and let all the air out. So next up is actually putting this wheel onto the machine. And here's our turntable bed that's going to kind of hold the wheel and spin it. And we've got this little kind of nub that sticks up here, and this needs to go through one of the lug holes on the wheel. So we'll set this down on here and line up that pin and kind of position the wheel so that the center bore of the hub is kind of lined up with the middle of the machine. And then off to the left, we've got our center kind of hold down, and this will go straight down, and you'll feel it kind of push in and click, and then we want to give it a half turn, and that locks it in place. So again, you push this down until it clicks, give it a half turn, and now it's locked in place. This part here is what actually holds the wheel down onto the machine, and the pin spins it. So we don't need to go crazy tight on this. We're just trying to hold this down flat onto the surface. So I could spend 20 minutes and spin this thing around and around and around until it goes all the way down. Or we've got these two little red handles that I'm going to push towards each other, slide it down, and then wait till they kind of click back out. Just heard it there. And then spin this until it snugs itself up. Now, I'm not sure if you can tell or not, but there's one of the ears on this thing is bent over, and somebody hit this with a hammer at some point while I was gone one summer. That is wholly unnecessary. Just kind of give it a good push till the wheel's secured and not coming off, and you're ready to move on to the next step. For the next step, we need to pop the bead off of this tire. So we've already deflated it, so there's no more air pressure in here. And we're going to use this arm to swing this over, and there's kind of two triggers back here. I want to pull them both up, and as I pull these triggers up, you'll see those two arms expand. And these plastic wheels are going to get forced down onto kind of this area of our tire and force that off of the bead. So I'll swing this around, and then as I pull this handle towards me and back, you can see that's what's going to line those rollers up on the tire. And I'm going to pull this top trigger and line it up so it's touching the tire but not going to be grabbing the wheel, because we don't want to damage the wheel or bend the wheel or anything like that. The other thing we notice, if we look at this from the side, it's at an angle. The wheel's kind of kicked off a little bit, but those two arms are at the same angle. So wherever the top one sits is where the bottom one's going to sit as well when we go to break the bottom bead. So to break that bead, we need to spin the actual wheel. And down here we've got 2 foot pedals. Kind of a dirty machine, there we go. So this middle pedal here is the one that's going to spin the table. And if I push down on this pedal, the machine spins clockwise. If I lift up on this pedal, the machine spins counterclockwise. When we go to pop the bead, we have to make sure that we lift up on that pedal and have the wheel spinning counterclockwise. Because otherwise, when I go to pop the bead by pressing this button down and putting pressure on that top bead, if I were to push down on it, the arm just gets pulled off of the wheel. So we go counterclockwise, and it pulls the arm in as we spin. So let's go ahead and knock off this top bead real quick. So as I'm spinning this, I'm going to feed that roller down and let it go and let it spin. Let it go, let it spin. And off comes the top bead. So as I'm looking at this from the top, you know, we obviously can't see what's going on the other side of the wheel, but there's a mirror tucked down there just to the right of the machine so that we can actually see where that roller is sitting. So like I said, up on top here, this top roller is sitting just, you know, just north of the wheel itself. And when I push this second trigger, we're going to see in the mirror that roller comes up and then is sitting in exactly the same spot on the bottom side of the wheel. So we can watch in that mirror as we spin the wheel, and again spin it slowly and push the button until we get that bottom bead to pop. So there we go. Now we've got that tire off of the wheel, and let's finish pulling that thing off and take a look at where the actual tire sits on the wheel. To get this the rest of the way off, we're going to have to use the spoon that's down here in the bottom right corner in that little cubby hole, and it's always going to go back there as soon as we're done using it. That way it's there for us to use the next time we need it. And we're going to use this arm, kind of flexi arm that comes down and around from the top of the machine, and we call this thing the duck head, because if you look at it from the top, it looks like a duck. So we've got the bill of the duck, and this is what we're going to use to pry on, and then the back of the duck and the tail of the duck are what's going to help guide our tire, our old tire off and our new tire on when we go to put that one on here in a second. So I'm going to set the camera down and we'll pry the top bead off of around this bead seat using the spoon and the duck belt. Another thing you'll note is that everything that's touching the wheel right now is plastic. This duck bill is plastic. There's a plastic cap around here. Everything is plastic. So I'm going to kind of push the duck down in there to make sure it's cupping around the lip of the wheel. And I'm going to push the bottom of the tire to make sure this is fully under the drop center. And I'll show you the drop center here in a second as soon as we pull this tire the rest of the way off. But I'm going to take the smooth end of my spoon. We've got another side over here that's got a little kind of nub on it. We're going to use the smooth side of our spoon, slide this over the duck bill, and then make sure we're pushing down over here on the drop center. And then you'll see this end kind of folds up and under, and that side of the tire comes right up and over the top. Now, normally we'd be paying attention to where the TPMS sensor is, the tire pressure monitoring system sensor, but right now this set of wheels just has a regular old rubber valve stem. We're going to be putting in a TPMS sensor as soon as I get this tire off, and then we're going to have to be super careful when we go to put the new tire on to make sure we don't damage that sensor. But let's get this thing spinning and pull this thing off. So remember before we were lifting up on that foot pedal down low? Well, this time we're going to push down because we want this thing to spin clockwise as we want the tire to run this way so that the spoon kind of levers the tire up over the wheel. Let it spin, but watch your fingers. And now this top side of the tire has been dismounted, and our bottom looks like it got stuck back on the bead, so we can pop that out of that roller. All right, now that that one's fully off, I'm going to grab my spoon that I threw on the ground. And this time I'm going to use the side that has this little nub on it so that I can lift the tire up. And kind of everybody has their own technique, but I'll use my knee and kind of hold the front side of the tire up at the top, put that nub side of the spoon back over my duck head, and make sure it sticks out the bottom, and then kind of in one motion lean back. And then again, I can stand on that middle pedal over here and send it around. So the tire is now off the wheel, and we can see just our bare wheel. So when I was talking about the drop center, that's this area right here of the wheel. If we look at this from the side, you can see there's the face of the wheel. Then there's this bit here, which is the bead seat. And you can see there's a little groove there. That's where the tire actually sits and where the seal comes from. Then there's the drop center, which allows the tire to kind of stretch so we can mount and dismount these things. And then there's another bead seat down here on the bottom. This is the area that we have to take a look at and make sure there's no corrosion or anything like that on here that you may have to clean up with a Scotch pad or something like that if you've got a wheel leak or a leak where the bead sits. We can also see some info about the tire, or I'm sorry, about the wheel that's on here. You know, the brand and the size and all that stuff. Sometimes you'll find some labels on the inside. But let's go ahead and take off this old valve stem. This is just a regular old rubber valve stem, and take a look at how to install a brand new TPMS sensor. So to remove this old valve core, I'm just going to take a razor blade and kind of gently cut straight through down here at the base on this rubber part until we can get this off of here. Rip this guy out of here. There we go. So now that's in two pieces, and we're going to put in our new sensor. We can see some information on this sensor as well. It'll tell you kind of what frequency the sensor's talking at. This one should be, was it 143 or 433 megahertz? It'll focus. There we go. And then this one actually even has the torque spec for this on here. BMW recommends 3.5 Newton meters torque spec on theirs, but this one says right on there 4 Newton meters, which is going to be, I don't know, somewhere just, what, quick math, south of like 40 inch-pounds. So I've got my inch-pound torque wrench set up, and we will use that to torque this down. But as I open this up, you can see that I've got a little gasket on here. I've got a rubber gasket down here, and this is what's actually going to hold the air pressure. So this is going to go up back to the same hole, and you'll see that the sensor kind of hugs right up on here underneath that bead seat in the drop center, and that's why you got to be really careful with that duck arm coming down to make sure you don't break off this sensor when you put it on, or when you put your tire on. So I'm going to kind of hold this up in place and then take this top plastic nut, screw that back on, and then I'll grab my torque wrench and torque this to spec. And there we go. Click, click, click. So right there at about 4 Newton meters, this thing isn't going anywhere, and that rubber seal should be jammed up in there enough to hold air pressure. We'll check that with a bottle of Simba Green too before we finish up with this wheel. But now it's time to get our new wheel, or our new tire, ready to go on this wheel. So before we throw the first side of this, this lower bead around the wheel, we need to make sure that we're putting this tire on the correct way. Now this is a directional tire, and if we look around the outside of this, it's going to tell us rotation, the wheel is supposed to spin that way. So looking at this is going to be a right side tire when we're done. And with these, 4, we need to make sure we mount 2 tires rotating in one direction and 2 tires rotating the other. Some tires are directional like these. Others are asymmetric, so that instead of having a rotation symbol on here, it's going to say inside or outside. I can show you that, in class if you want. I've got another set of wheels that are asymmetric. And then some tires are going to be completely symmetrical and it doesn't matter. You just throw them on. But for these, they're directional, so we're going to make sure that 2 have the arrows pointing that way, and then 2 have the arrows pointing that way. So we've got rights and lefts. But let's go ahead and get some tire lube on this thing so we can push that first bead onto the wheel by hand, and then the second bead, the top bead, we're going to use the machine. Over on the right-hand side of the machine, we're going to have a brush that we're going to use to put our tire lube on, and we've got a tub that didn't get the cap put back on it, so this should be full, but instead, when it dries out, you get a nasty little brick like this. So we're going to make the best of what we got here. All right, so I'm going to take that brush that has a little bit of tire lube on there, and we're going to run this around the bead of the tire, so that will hopefully kind of help this slip over the bead seat of the wheel. We're going to kind of do the best with what we got because our tire paste is a little crusty. All right, so I wet this down with a little bit of Simple Green to kind of hopefully give us a little bit more moisture. And then once we have this side done, we're going to come in here and we're going to hit this inside edge on this side of our bead. Because this is the one that's going to get pushed over, and then this side in here is the one that's going to have to slide over for the outside bead. And once we've got that done, we're going to try and push this onto the wheel. So flip this over, and again, this first one doesn't really matter which direction it's going because this is the first one that we are doing. But I am going to reposition the wheel on the machine so that my TPMS sensor is at 12 o'clock. So when the TPMS sensor up top, so when I push this on, it's going to slip right over and I don't run any risk of damaging it. So the first side goes on, and then we can work the outside. A little bit of that, a little bit on that side, a little bit on that side, and it's on. That's more about technique than it is force, and some tires are a bit more compliant than others. So far this one seems to be okay, but that was just the first bead. Alright, so as you can see, I've got the TPMS sensor kind of right here at 12 o'clock, so that when I put this duck head down, it's not touching the actual sensor itself, and the sensor is going to go this way. And ideally, by the time the sensor gets back around to 12 o'clock, the tire is already on the wheel, and we shouldn't have to go, over 360 degrees. So the first thing we have to do is kind of work this down as best we can, and get this top lip on the back side of the duck head. And then there's this little lever that we're going to flip to the back, and that's going to help push the bead down into the bead seat on the wheel. I'm going to press down on this pedal, and it's going to spin clockwise, and I'm going to try and push and make sure that the tire itself is actually going underneath and going on the bead seat. You don't want this tire to get stuck on here, because then it'll get jammed up and it'll actually damage that metal band that's run through here on the bead. So hopefully we can get this in one shot, but we'll see how it goes. Some tires are more compliant than others. And this one is not compliant. So we're going to cheat a little bit. Put my duck head back in. Push that back down and around. And I'm going to use my spoon to cheat. And we're on, and the tire is fully on before we got back to the TPMS sensor. So our next step is going to be to remove the valve core and then inflate this tire so the tire pops back up onto the bead fully. On the left-hand side of the machine here, we've got kind of these storage areas here. So I'll put the tool and my valve core here in that bin. Then I'm going to grab my tire pressure filler here and just clip this onto the valve to inflate it. And then I've got a foot pedal down here. Again, this is on the left side of the machine. And I'm going to press this halfway down. If you press it all the way down, we've got a little cheetah tank back there that's going to push 180 psi of air into this tire to help inflate some of those harder tires. Or harder tires to get the bead to seat. This should be fine. So I'm just going to press halfway down on this pedal, and we're going to hear two big pops, and we're going to see the tire inflate as it pops over the bead. That may have been the bottom bead. We're getting there. There it goes. So that loud pop was that top bead. So now we're good to go. You can see this took a ton of pressure to inflate. So we're going to bring that back down and set it down to the 35 psi or wherever it should be. I'll pull this off and put the valve core back in as well. All right, so kind of off camera, I put the valve core back in here as the air was coming out. And one of the things we're going to notice about this particular valve core tool, if it'll focus, there we go. This says metal And there's a torque spec on there. If it'll focus, there you go. There's a torque spec on there. So this is actually a torque wrench. So as I twist this down and I go to tighten it, you hear that click? That's my torque wrench. So it's not actually tightening anymore. It's just clicking and spinning inside the tool. So now we know that that's tight, and this is where I'll take a bottle of Simple Green and spray down this new valve core, or this new TPMS sensor and valve stem, and make sure it's not leaking. So spray down some Simple Green. I don't see any new bubbles forming, I don't think. I think that's just kind of the soapy water running down doing its thing. So I think we are in good shape. We can pop these old weights off. Now normally if you have weights on the outside that are stuck, you need to remove them before you dismount and mount your new tire. But with these stick-on weights on the inside, we're gonna wait until we go over there to balance before we remove those. But this tire is done, and now it's time to move it over to that machine where we can do our road force balance.